There's a specific kind of heartbreak that hits you when you see something pure, something that represents the last shred of your family's dignity, defiled by neon spray paint. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the hissing sound of an aerosol can, the morning mist of Mirror Lake still clinging to the pines, only to find my inheritance, a pristine, vintage 1986 Sea Ray cruiser, branded like cattle. Across the spotless white fiberglass, in dripping, toxic green letters 2 feet high, was the word eyesore. It looked like a wound, like radioactive sludge bleeding down the side of a vessel that had survived 40 brutal Colorado winters without a single scratch. Whoever did it wanted me to feel it, wanted the fumes to burn my throat, wanted to break me. But they made a tactical error, a fatal miscalculation that happens when suburban tyrants mistake kindness for weakness. They didn't know they were declaring war on a man who spent 20 years in Marine Corps logistics, a man who knows that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's a filing cabinet. My name is Elias Thorne, and just 6 months ago, I was rotting away in a depressing studio apartment in Phoenix, watching my life dissolve after a divorce that left me with nothing but weakened custody of my teenage daughter, Maya. I was drifting, a ghost in my own life, until Uncle Silas passed away at 90. Silas was the only one who ever understood me, a man who built his own world with his bare hands. He left me his cabin on Mirror Lake, a body of water so clear it felt like looking into the earth's soul, nestled deep in the Rockies. Moving there felt like breathing for the first time in years. The cabin was a time capsule of 1940s craftsmanship, hand-hewn logs, a stone hearth, and a silence so deep it healed you. But paradise, I quickly learned, had a gatekeeper. Her name was Patricia Vance. Imagine a woman who treats the neighborhood directory like a hit list. Patricia was the president of the Serenity Shores Community Association, a retired corporate liquidator who ruled our 47 homes from a glass and steel fortress that looked less like a house and more like an Apple store designed by a sociopath. Her manicured lawn was measured with lasers. Her white Mercedes G-Wagon sat in the driveway like a tank awaiting deployment. She had driven 3 families out in 2 years, weaponizing fines and property values like artillery shells. Our first skirmish happened on my second Tuesday. I was on the dock, drinking coffee, watching the sunrise ignite the peaks, when I heard the click-clack of designer heels on the wooden planks. It sounded like a countdown. "Mr. Thorne," she didn't ask, she announced, clutching a clipboard like a shield. "We need to discuss the disturbance." I looked around at the empty, silent lake. "Disturbance, ma'am? Your boat," she sneered, pointing a manicured finger at Uncle Silas's pride and joy. "It creates unsightly ripples. It disturbs the aesthetic stillness of the water surface, which lowers the visual value of our waterfront properties. You have 72 hours to remove it, or face fines of $500 a day." Ripples. She was fining me for physics. "Ma'am, this boat is registered, insured, and parked at my private dock," I replied, keeping my voice steady, the way you speak to a person holding a grenade. "We'll see." She smiled, a cold, predatory expression that didn't reach her eyes. That was the opening shot. What followed was a campaign of psychological terror that would have impressed the KGB. First came the certified letters, thick envelopes thudding against my door like dead birds. Then, the anonymous complaints to the county, claiming I was running a commercial ferry service. Absurd, considering I only took the boat out to fish with Maya. Then, the petition. Patricia had bullied 12 terrified neighbors into signing a document claiming my diesel engine, which purred quieter than a sewing machine, was causing sonic trauma. But the spray paint? The vandalism on Silas's boat? That shifted the dynamic. That wasn't bureaucracy. That was a hate crime against my family's legacy. I didn't scrub the paint off immediately. I left it there, a neon scar, and I went to work. I treated the cabin like a forward operating base. I installed 4K night vision cameras, hidden in birdhouses and pine trees, creating a surveillance net that covered every inch of my shoreline. I went to the county courthouse, diving into the basement archives, breathing in the dust of a century of property law. I met Officer Davis, a weary sheriff's deputy who looked like he'd seen too many neighbor disputes turn violent. He took photos of the vandalism, shaking his head. "Mr. Thorne, Patricia Vance has filed 40 harassment complaints this year alone. She's out of control, but she stays just inside the legal lines. Be careful. I didn't want to be careful. I wanted to be effective. I sent a demand letter to the HOA for the repairs, $4,000. Patricia's response was nuclear. She called an emergency board meeting, proposing a new bylaw. No watercraft over 25 feet or older than 15 years. It was a laser-guided missile aimed directly at my boat. If it passed, I'd be in violation every second of the day. But Patricia made a classic villain mistake. She assumed I was just another broke, lonely veteran she could bulldoze. She didn't know what I had found in Uncle Silas's attic. It was a rainy Tuesday when I found the box. It was tucked behind a stack of old National Geographics, smelling of cedar and thyme. Inside was a leather-bound folio containing deeds, surveys, and letters dating back to the Great War. One document, yellow and brittle, caught my eye. It was a land grant from 1918, signed by my great-grandfather, Jebediah Thorne. I read the legal jargon, the archaic phrasing about riparian rights and high water marks, and perpetual stewardship. I didn't fully grasp the magnitude of it yet, but my gut, that instinct that had kept my convoys safe in the desert, started screaming. I needed a translator. I hired Elena Ross, a property attorney in town known for having a shark's instinct and a saint's patience. I sat in her office, sliding the brittle paper across her mahogany desk. She put on her glasses, read it once, frowned, and then read it again. Then she looked up at me, and her eyes were wide. "Elias," she whispered, "do you have any idea what this is? It's a deed, right?" "No," she said, a slow grin spreading across her face. "This isn't a deed for the land next to the lake. This is a deed for the lake." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Explain." "Mirror Lake isn't a natural formation," she explained, tapping the map. "Your great-grandfather dammed the creek in 1918 to power his sawmill. Under Colorado water law, specifically the prior appropriation doctrine, he created the reservoir. He owns the water, the lakebed, and the shoreline up to the high water mark. When the developers built Serenity Shores in the 80s, they bought the land around the lake, but they never bought the lake itself. They just assumed. So, I said, the realization hitting me like a freight train, when Patricia tells me to move my boat. "She's telling you to move your property off of your property." Elena laughed, a sound like pure victory. "Technically, Elias, every time she dips her toe in that water, she's trespassing. We had the nuclear codes, but we weren't going to launch just yet. We were going to let Patricia load the weapon, aim it at me, and pull the trigger, only to realize the barrel was blocked. Armed with the knowledge that I was the feudal lord of Mirror Lake, the psychological warfare shifted. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the hunter waiting in the blind. I needed to let Patricia expose herself completely, to document her malice so thoroughly that no judge in America would side with her. I began my reconnaissance. I reached out to the neighbors, the silent resistance. I met Mrs. Higgins, a retired librarian, by the mailboxes. She looked over her shoulder before whispering. She fined me $2,000 for planting hydrangeas that were too blue. She said they clashed with the community vibe. Then there was Colonel Mac McAllister, a Vietnam vet who had practically gone into hiding. "Patricia put a lien on my house because my flagpole was 3 inches too tall," he growled, clutching his cane. "She's a tyrant, son. She feeds on control." They were terrified. But when I told them I had a plan, I saw a spark of hope return to their eyes. We formed a network. They documented every fine, every threat, every time Patricia prowled their property lines with her tape measure. Meanwhile, Patricia was escalating. She wasn't satisfied with the fines. She wanted me erased. She hired a marine expert, who turned out to be her nephew with a blog, to write a report claiming my boat was an ecological disaster, leaking oil and killing native trout. She posted photos of my boat on the community Facebook page, captioned, "This monstrosity is ruining our property values. Join the fight to save our shores." She even tried to weaponize the police. I was eating dinner with Maya one evening when Officer Davis knocked on the door again. She called again. "Elias," he sighed, looking exhausted. "Claims you're running a drug smuggling operation via the water. I have to check, it's protocol." Maya, who had been terrified of the conflict, watched me calmly show the officer around. When he left, apologizing, she looked at me. "Dad, why don't you fight back? Why do you let her do this?" "I am fighting, honey," I told her. "I'm just waiting for her to run out of ammo." The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I returned from a supply run to town to find my boat drifting 50 yards offshore, dangerously close to the rocky shoals. The dock lines hadn't snapped. They had been sliced. Clean cuts. Razor sharp. I sprinted to the control room I'd set up in the spare bedroom. I rewound the footage. There, at 2:14 a.m., was a figure in black, moving with purpose. But they got sloppy. As they turned to leave, a security light triggered, illuminating the face just for a split second. It wasn't a hired thug. It was Patricia Vance. She was holding the knife, a look of grim satisfaction on her face, before she climbed back into her pristine white SUV. She had crossed the line from annoying neighbor to felon. I called Elena. "I have her," I said. She cut the lines. "She tried to wreck the boat." "Good," Elena said, her voice turning cold. "But don't call the police yet. She's calling a vote next week to ban your boat and levy a $10,000 special assessment on you to pay for legal fees. She wants to bankrupt you publicly. Let's give her the audience she wants." The days leading up to the meeting were agonizing. Patricia ramped up the pressure. She hired a lawyer, a shark named Mr. Sterling, who sent me a cease and desist letter on thick, creamy paper, demanding I surrender the vessel or face a lawsuit for nuisance and degradation of lifestyle. They were suing me for $100,000 in damages for the mental anguish my boat caused the community. I continued to play the part of the beleaguered veteran. I walked the shoreline, looking defeated, while secretly, Elena and I were finalizing the survey maps. The surveyor I hired had made a fascinating discovery. The property lines were even worse than we thought. Because the lake level had fluctuated over the century, the high water mark meant my property extended well past the water's edge. Not only were all the neighbors' docks on my land, but Patricia's beloved Zen gazebo, a glass-walled structure right on the water where she drank her morning wine, was entirely, 100%, on my property. The irony was delicious. She was launching attacks from a fortress built on my soil. The night of the meeting arrived. The community center was packed. Patricia had rallied her troops. About 60 people were there. She stood at the podium, dressed in a sharp blazer, projecting charts onto a screen. The charts showed ripples versus property value, a graph that made no sense, and unflattering, zoomed-in photos of my boat. "Tonight," Patricia announced, her voice booming with theatrical outrage, "we take back our peace. We cannot allow one selfish individual to hold this community hostage with his industrial machinery. I am calling for a vote to ban Mr. Thorne's vessel and to initiate foreclosure proceedings if he fails to pay the damages." The room buzzed. Mrs. Higgins looked at me with tearful eyes. Colonel Mack clenched his jaw. They thought I was finished. Patricia looked at me, a smirk playing on her lips. "Mr. Thorne, do you have anything to say before we vote to ruin you?" I stood up. I didn't walk to the podium fast. I took my time. I carried a single flash drive. "Actually, Patricia," I said, my voice calm, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "I have a presentation of my own." I plugged the drive into the laptop. The screen flickered, replacing her nonsense graphs with a high-resolution scan of a document from 1918. "This," I began, pointing to the screen, "is the original land grant for this valley." Patricia rolled her eyes. "History lessons won't save you, Elias." "Maybe not," I said, "but property law will." I clicked the remote. The screen changed to a modern, color-coded survey map. The lake was shaded in bright red. The red area was labeled, "Property of Elias Thorne." "You see," I said, turning to face the crowd, "you all bought houses near the lake. But my great-grandfather made the lake. He never sold the water rights. He never sold the lake bed. When Uncle Silas died, he didn't just leave me a cabin. He left me the water." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. "That means," I continued, looking directly at Patricia, "that every dock, every buoy, and every boat currently floating on Mirror Lake is trespassing on private property. Specifically, my private property." Patricia's face went the color of ash. That's absurd. That's a lie. It's a matter of public record." Elena spoke up from the back row, standing up and waving a stack of certified files. "And we've already filed the quiet title action. It's done." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen showed a zoomed-in aerial shot of Patricia's house. A bright yellow line showed my property boundary. It cut right through her lawn, swallowing her dock and her precious Zen gazebo. And Patricia, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low, your gazebo is parked on my land. You owe me back rent for 10 years. And regarding the ripples, I'm afraid you're trespassing every time you look at them. The chaos that followed was cinematic. Patricia tried to scream, to maintain order, but she was drowning in a sea of questions from terrified homeowners. What does this mean? Do we have to move our docks? Did the HOA know this? I raised my hand, and surprisingly, the room fell silent. They were looking to me now, not her. I am not a tyrant, I said, looking around at the faces of my neighbors, people who had been bullied just like me. I don't want to ban your boats. I don't want to fine you for your flagpoles. I don't care about the color of your hydrangeas. I am willing to grant a permanent license for lake access to every single homeowner here, for $1 a year. A collective gasp of relief swept through the room. Except, I pointed a finger at Patricia, who was trembling, clutching the podium like it was the Titanic's rail. Except for the person who vandalized my boat. The person who cut my dock lines at 2 a.m. I played the video footage. On the giant projection screen, 60 people watched their HOA president, the woman who measured their grass with a ruler, creeping in the dark with a knife in her hand. The grainy night vision captured her face perfectly. The gasp turned into an uproar. Colonel Mack stood up, banging his cane on the floor. She tried to sink a veteran's boat. That's criminal mischief. That's attempted destruction of property. Patricia shrank back. She looked small now. The armor of her authority had shattered. I have already spoken to the sheriff, I said. Charges are being filed for vandalism and trespassing. But I'm willing to drop the civil suit for damages, Patricia, on 2 conditions. What? She hissed, tears of rage streaming down her face. 1, you resign immediately. 2, you move your gazebo off my land by Monday. Or I will remove it with a chainsaw. The vote to remove her from the board was unanimous. It took 5 minutes. The fallout was swift. Patricia Vance didn't just resign, she fled. She put her house on the market the next day. The rumor was she moved to a condo in Scottsdale, somewhere with no yard and no lake. The new HOA board was elected that night. Mrs. Higgins became the president, running on a platform of live and let live. But the real victory wasn't the legal win. It was the shift in the air. 2 weeks later, I was on the dock. The neon paint was finally scrubbed off, the hull of the Sea Ray gleaming white again. Maya was with me, untying the ropes. She looked happy, lighter. Ready, Captain? She asked. Ready, I smiled. We motored out into the center of the lake. The water was glass. The sun was setting, turning the peaks purple and gold. As I throttled up, the diesel engine purred, a deep, rhythmic heartbeat. We cut through the water, creating a massive, glorious wake. The ripples spread out, wide and unapologetic, rolling toward the shorelines where neighbors waved from their decks. Nobody called the police. Nobody measured the waves. We established the Thorn Conservation Trust. The HOA fees that used to go to Patricia's legal wars now went into stocking the lake with trout and maintaining the dam. We turned Mirror Lake into a true community, one based on respect, not fear. As I sat there, watching Maya laugh as the spray hit her face, I thought about Uncle Silas. He knew what he had. He knew he owned the lake, but he never enforced it. He let them play, let them pretend they owned it, because he believed good neighbors make a good life. But he also left me the weapon, tucked away in that box, just in case a bully ever tried to take it all away. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We spend so much time fighting over fences, over property lines, over who has the right to tell who what to do. Patricia had power, or she thought she did, but she had no ownership. I had ownership, but I didn't want the power. Was I right to humiliate her like that? To hold the nuclear codes and drop the bomb in front of everyone? Some might say I should have settled it quietly. But when you see a bully holding a knife to everything you love, you don't ask them nicely to stop. You change the rules of the game. Justice, I've learned, isn't just about the law. It's about making sure the ripples you leave behind are the kind that clean the water, not the kind that poison it. So, tell me, if you held the deed to the whole world your enemy lived in, would you have been as merciful as I was? Or would you have evicted her from paradise? Let the debate begin.